Hi students, in this video I'm going to cover how to write conclusions effectively. So I'm going to cover first some conclusion killers, and then I'll show you some options you have in writing conclusions. There is a copy of these notes for you linked onto the course calendar the same date as this video. So there are 5 common conclusion killers that my students normally use in their writing. And what these do is they kill an effective paper by ending it on an obvious, general, or cliche note. So I've highlighted them in various colors, and then we'll take a look at a conclusion and how that conclusion is weak because of its use of these conclusion killers. So the first one is a summary, or that's when you restate your thesis. And you may have learned this in school that it's a good idea to restate your thesis. Sometimes that's true, but normally, if you've argued your point well, you don't have to restate your thesis, and your thesis just sounds redundant. The second conclusion killer is an obvious statement. Those are things that are just already common knowledge and are just taking up space because you ran out of things to say. Like that one, you also have statements that are too general and they're not specific enough. Some students like to give advice to the reader and talk to the reader at the end of their essay. And sometimes this is something that you want to do, but normally when you're thinking about your audience, sometimes you don't want to talk directly to your audience. And in addition to that, your paragraph should inspire and not just that conclusion. And then lastly, in yellow, we'll take a look at what I call phony baloney or dishonest writing. Normally, the dishonest writing is really general and it reads shallow. So let's take a look at these conclusion killers in action. Because of my negative experiences with English teachers and the standardized tests I had to take in middle school and high school, I am a fearful reader and writer. Now, that's a conclusion killer because that's a restatement of the thesis, and you can see that that's in green. That was the main argument of this paper, and so the student is just restating it. The next one is in blue, and that's an obvious statement. I think I should get over my fear. Well, that's pretty obvious to the reader. If I truly want to succeed in life, that part in purple is too general. What does that mean that they want to truly succeed in life? The next part is another obvious statement. Reading more and practicing my writing takes a lot of time. Now, these kinds of things are what students rely on when they've run out of things to say and they think that just by throwing in general statements, they can wrap up their paper, but it's very ineffective. Um, Another example here, but with hard work and dedication, it's worth it. So here we have a combination of too general and also phony baloney. So you can go through this paragraph and take a look at how the student is engaging in these conclusion killers, sometimes multiple conclusion killers in one sentence. Now, this part here that's in beige is actually the most insightful and um, effective statement in the whole conclusion. Now, remember, we've talked about how a conclusion should show relevance. Now, when you are answering so what, you are showing why your topic is important and why the issue you're discussing is important to your audience. And so this part in beige, the student is actually tapping into that. I think about all the writing assignments I just didn't care about and wonder who I would be now if I actually read and took the time to revise my papers. So here the student is being reflective. She's wondering what the impact of her actions are. And so those kinds of statements are what make effective conclusions. So remember, the key to an effective conclusion is to show why your topic matters. And that's answering the so what question. So let's take a look at a few revised conclusions on this same topic, and I'll show you how you can show relevance and answer the so what question. So, for a paper like this about a student's reading and writing, the first option you have in writing a conclusion is to take on a course of action solution. Now, this conclusion is helpful for those who want to address the problem they've brought up in their essay. Now, you may not have brought up a problem. So, in this conclusion, the writer provides an idea about what would solve the problem. But again, this wouldn't work for you if you're not discussing a problem. So you can take a look at this paragraph and see the different ways that the student is presenting a solution. Now, solutions are important when you're thinking about a issue as a problem, and so that's why this works as a relevant wrapping up for your essay. So please feel free to pause the video and take a look at the attachment in the course calendar to review that. The second type is a contextualization conclusion. Now, this type of conclusion provides context. You take a specific idea and you drop it into a larger idea to see what happens. So, for example, here, the writer takes her idea of who she is as a reader and writer. That's very specific. And she drops it into the idea of who she is as a person or human being. That's a larger idea. And her conclusion is actually quite deep. I really suggest for students to try the contextualization conclusion because it helps you make connections between whatever issue you're describing and a larger issue. So, for example, in this conclusion, the student taps into a really insightful idea about how she doesn't know herself very well. And perhaps that has something to do with how she's never taken the time to read and reflect in her writing about who she is. The next type of conclusion that is effective is when you address the limitations of an issue. So, this type of conclusion is a little difficult and it demands that you reflect. So, you have to consider the weaknesses of your point of view. Now, in this next one, it's very similar to the limitations conclusion, and this is where you address opposing viewpoints. So, instead of just looking at the weaknesses of your own ideas in your conclusion, in this next one, you consider specific points that argue against your viewpoint. And the reason this shows relevance or answers the so what question is that it shows you're thinking through ideas and you're not fully convinced on either side. So it shows that you're engaged in a larger conversation going on about your topic. So, a couple of last minute things I want to mention. Try to stay away from beginning your conclusion with in conclusion or to wrap up. Phrases like these are expected from the writer, and so they read cliche. And honestly, they can make your reader turn off their ears. So try to stay away from those types of openings for your conclusion. Also, I want to encourage you all to be honest in your conclusions. Even if your honesty shows weakness, even if your honesty shows that you're not fully informed or that you're still thinking through an issue, that will actually build your credibility because it comes across as sincere and your audience will be more open to what you have to say. So please take a look at the attachment and make sure you review the different types of conclusions that I've provided for you. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks, guys. I'll see you online.